Okay, gewaldig. So, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Those who are here in person, those who are here online, those who are watching the recording. Thank you for joining us as we jump back into Likutei Moharan, Torah Yud Aleph. B'siyata d'shmaya, yesterday was particularly dense. I think it's the least we've done in a day, just because these two paragraphs are very full and very, very complex, new ideas. So we're going to run through them very quickly, just before we're able to jump in. If you don't mind sitting somewhere, just because I don't want to bump the cameras. Thank you. So, yesterday we were learning about the two levels of Shmir Sabris, two different realms, that enable the person to then draw the Vav of Moisef, Yosef HaTzadik, Kol Makom Shata Moitze, Geder Erva. Right, you increase Kedusha. Kedusha is always increasing as opposed to decreasing. And you bring that Vav into the word Kvad, which is Kvad Peh, which means that a person is not able to allow their speech to reflect the light of the Torah that they're learning. And if you bring the Vav into it, then it becomes Kavod and then V'lo Yidayim. And in order for that to happen, says the Rebbe, a person has to be bringing Shmir Sabris into their life, which is the Bechina of the Lamed Tes, Oyros of the Yud and the Hey and the Vav, right, which collectively is Lamed Tes, as opposed to Chas v'Shalom, the opposite, where it can become Lamed Tes Malachos, Lamed Tes Malchus. And the Rebbe says that there are two levels of that Shmir Sabris. There's Shmir Sabris of the Yemei Achol, and there's Shmir Sabris of the Tzadikim of Shabbos Kodesh. Two madrigas. And the Tzadik connected these to the two hanhagas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way that Hashem runs the world, which are distinct between the 6 days of the week, which is one reality of Olam Hazeh, and then a glimmer, a me'ain, of a reality, or according to the tzaddikim, a mayan of the mayan Olam Haba. It's connected to the flow of the Olam Haba-oriented reality, where it's V'lo Yakanif Od Marecha, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is completely revealed, and nature is nullified. And that's the revelation of the Yehuda Ilah, right? The perspective from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's perspective, where Einoid Mavadai, right? Which is not our current way of considering, because generally the way that we think right now is obviously within the constraints of our experience of the physical world. That's the 6 days of the week. And the distinction Rebbe Nachman drew between his own Hanhaga Kiviyachol, and then the Hanhaga of Hashem through this Malach Matat Sarapanim, this Malach who represents the garbing through all the different frameworks of this worldliness that are the intermediaries, so to speak, between pure godliness, whatever that means, and the world as we experience it, which is connected to the Vav Midas of Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, and Yesod, the mediation of the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that comes down through this technological framework of the Malach Matat, who was Enosh, right? And the pasuk tells us, Ki lakach oso Elohim, right? And he became this malach, and he was elevated to this level. But again, still, Chas v'Shalom, not having an independent reshus on his own. And neglected to mention yesterday, this was the mistake of Elisha ben Avuya, right? Is that when he went into the paradise, where Kitzitz ben Atiyas, where he saw the malach matat, who was sitting and transcribing the maisim of Klal Yisrael as an interface to bring Hashem down to Klal Yisrael, and so to speak, to enable Klal Yisrael's actions to resonate above as that intermediary space. And he thought that Shemesh Tirishuyas, Chas v'Shalom. So he made the mistake that we were so careful to clarify yesterday. This is not a divine figure, right? This is just a mode of governance. This is a mode of enclothing through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is showing up in a more concealed way, as opposed to Shabbos, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is revealing himself b'Raza de'echad. And that's what we learned. There's the two levels of Shmir Sabris, Shakai of the Chol, Shakai of Shabbos, and then we said that this is really the ma'amakim, the depth of halacha and Kabbalah. Kabbalah's Rosh Hashanah Kabbalah's Rosh Hashanah Hishtachavu LaHashem B'Hadras Kodesh, and we said Hishtachavaya is a total bittul. B'Hadras Kodesh, the hadar of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is associated with Shakai, with Shmir Sabris, because Yosef HaTzadik, who is the paradigm of Shmir Sabris, is called B'char Shoyrei Hadar Lai. And so there's a hishtachavul Hashem b'hadras kodesh. There's a hadar and a kedusha. Kalat makam shata moitze geder erva shamat moitze kedusha. So kedusha is also associated with shmiras habris. There's a place of hadar and kodesh, hadras kodesh. That's a bechina of hishtachavul Hashem. That's total nullification. That's the bechina of Yehuda Ilah. Right, where a person doesn't experience the reality of this worldliness, it's total bittul. And again, if a person lifts that into the experience of zivug, right, so that's a point where the person is totally nullified from the standpoint of physical pleasure, and it enables a person to transcend and in their machshava to be meditating on the much higher levels of the reflective energies of Ish v'Isha, which is Kutshavrichu Shchinte, and really in that moment of ecstatic physical pleasure, a person can at the very same moment be experiencing the cosmic unity that they, in that moment, are reflecting in their own personal zivug. And if a person is on the madrega of the shakai of Shabbos, of that aspect of the me'ena, the mahaba, of Aloy Kanaf Oid Marecha, of the Yechudi Ilah, so that would mean that a person has completely transcended their own personal experience in that moment, which is a madrega that's reachable, and it takes work, but it's possible. And that a person in that moment instead is mamish in that moment, not before, not after, in that moment, is filled with machshavas kadoshos regarding the cosmic unity between Kudsha Baruch Hu and Shchinte, that an echo of which can be heard if a person is makadosh themselves during zivug. And I think that answers some of your question, because right, you have to look beyond and say, okay, but how does this reflect in my life, right? Well, what does that mean for our zivugim, right? Which is obviously the tachlis, but it's very real. And the other is beautiful, and it's the zivug of the miachal, but it's still garbed in one's own personal gratification. A person is not thinking holy thoughts. A person is not thinking about Hashem. A person is involved in the purely natural physical act of procreation. Okay, you hear the distinction between these two. Okay, this is Kabbalah, the bechin of Shmir Sabris, that's Hishtachavu, La Hashem B'Hadras Kodesh. And then on the flip side, we have Halacha, which is Rosh Tevis, Hariu La Hashem Kol Haaretz. And over here it's the Yichud Tata. There is an Aretz. We experience this world through the garb of our bodies, and we experience HaKadosh Baruch Hu's nitzotzos to Kedusha within the garb of the food and the drink, right? But a person is encountering those first and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Baal Shem Tov wanted that we should encounter Hashem first and then see a cup of water, right? Meaning that first and foremost came the godliness. That's the Bechin of the Yichudi Law, where the truth is that Ein Oidem Alvadai, but most people are on the level of halacha of Ariul Hashem Kol Haaretz. And the Rebbe says that when you have Kabbalah in its hislabshus, when it garbs and clothes itself within the halacha, which we spent a lot of time yesterday, so then you have a davar shalem. That's yichud kudsha baruch hu shchinte. That's the total and complete enmeshing of soul coming down into the body, enabling halacha to come alive, right? Mamish to come alive. You don't have that, so then it's a goylem, right? Then it's dead. And then it's just one side of the coin, but it's missing its vitality, and it's missing its chiyas, or chayas, whether you're Breslov or Lubavitch, call it chayas or chiyas. So let's jump back into that. That's Ois Zayin. V'zeh b'chinas razin, v'razin derazin. This is the aspect of mysteries and mysteries of mysteries. Says the Rebbe Razin, because he's trying to drive this point home. There is no rationality in Yiddishkeit. It's all mysticism. It just shows up on the philosophical level, and it shows up on the practical level, but the core of it is mystical. There's no question about it. So the Rebbe says, Razin is b'china v'alacha. Alacha has mysteries already. Razin de Razin, u'b'chinas Kabbalah. These are the mysteries of the mysteries. Hislabshus hakabbalah b'halacha b'chinas hanhagas hakadosh baruch hu b'sheishus miachal. When a person is engaging with the Kabbalistic intentions through the experience of halacha, that's the aspect of the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu manifests within this system of matat, whatever that means. We don't know what a malach is, so we're using very broad and undefined terms, but this is what the Svarim tell us, in the 6 days of the week. Shehu b'chinas yichud tata. And halacha is the mediary system, or the intermediate system, that enables us to interact with the world in a way that we could reveal the nitzotzos to Kedusha within it. Whether, again, it's through drinking, it's through eating, it's through masamatan, it's through interpersonal relationships, it's through marriage, it's through children, it's through etc., etc., etc. This is called yichud tata. V'zeh b'chinas, right? Because again, in yichudi law, there's no halacha. Right, when a person is meditating just on Yichudei Ilah, which is really the primary point of the Nefesh HaChaim, I think like we pointed out yesterday, if all you have is Yichudei Ilah, so then the Nefesh HaChaim says, oh, why can't you think Torah thoughts in a bathroom? And why can't you eat pig? It's all God. It's all, right? So from that standpoint, it's mamish, everything is Hashva Gemura. Chas v'shalom. Because Ein Oidem Avadein, everything is Elikos. And the whole thing is a big fairy tale about there being places that are Kodesh and places that are Chol and things that are holier and times that are holier. So the Nefesh HaChaim says, don't be fooled. We live in Yichudei Tata world. There are moments when we taste the reality of Ein Oidem Avadein, like he says, during Shemana Esrei, during Kriya Shema, in moments of grave danger, Kiyah do other school for the Nefesh HaChaim to meditate on Ein Oidem Avadein. And the Baal Tanya is a little bit more lenient. And the Baal Tanya says, anytime that a person needs a little bit of a boost just to get themselves realigned, it's Mesamech the Lev. And that's one of the distinctions between Tanya and that general approach of the Beis Medrash of the Baal Shem and Nefesh HaChaim, and that general approach of the Geulah. But be that as it may, everybody was maskim to this reality. Right? Meaning, and I wrote an article once, and I have it printed in my most recent book, From My Heart to Yours. It's an essay where the Nefesh HaChaim and Tanya diverge. And really it comes out, based on my own personal learning, it's my opinion, but it comes out that they really agree on 99% of things. The question was a question of what's riskier, to lean to the side of Yichudei Tata or to lean to the side of Yichudei Ilah. The Nefesh HaChaim felt, like we're just saying, that it's much more risky to be, anchored in a perspective of Yichudei Ilah, right? Because in that perspective, then a person can come to, the halacha is not so clear cut anymore, and a person's too much tasting from that realm of Yediyah, along with all of its associated concepts that we've learned together. And by the way, I was just flipping through the page. We've done quite a bit. Look at, I'm flipping through all this. We learned this. Unbelievable. Chazei Hashem. Right, and with all the associated topics, and a person can be leaning into a reality that's not really our own, and the Torah legislates for us here, because that's what halacha is, Yichudei Tata. Now the Hasidim felt that it's much more risky to anchor yourself in Yichudei Tata, because then a person can turn into a robot, and a person can turn, can be utilizing this experience of Torah and mitzvahs that's supposed to bring us to a place of humility and consciousness, and it can become, as we're going to learn in Torah Yud Beis in a very dramatic way, it can become really the opposite. And so, but both of them agreed that the ultimate goal is balance. The question was, where is the balance along the spectrum? Right? So halacha is Yichudei Tata, because again, Yichudei Ilah, there's no halacha. It's in this world that we need halacha to enable us to extract the divinity from beyond all of the different aspects and facets of the physical world throughout our own personal journey in life. And this is the end of that pasuk that we had quoted in the previous chapter, in the previous paragraph, of Miknaf ha'aretz zmirei shamanu, that la'asid lavai, that we're going to hear songs that are emerging miknaf ha'aretz, and knaf is connected to yikanef, and that's the aspect of the pasuk Hariu Hashem Kal Haaretz, the zmiris that we're going to hear from the earth, is from the aspect of Alay Kanef Ayid Mayrecha, because miknaf ha'aretz zmiris shamanu, from behind the illusory garment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is wearing, kiviyachol, which is this matat, you're going to hear the melodies of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence that's being revealed. Now, the end of that pasuk, which we've had earlier in the Likutei Moharan, is Tzvi L'Tzadik. We're going to hear praises to the tzaddikim, razili, razili. Mysteries are said to be mysteries. And like we had learned, when we previously brought this pasuk in a different context, the Mefarshim there explain that the Navi is saying, I heard different kinds of eventualities. This could end one way, this could end another way. There's going to be terrible Puranos and Gog Magog, or there's going to be all the ecstatic visions. And literally, these are two drachim, and it's up to us to choose which reality we want to manifest as a human species. The world is going to end. The question is how. Is it going to rise up into this beautiful, paradise that we create in this world of Garza Avim Keves and Elav Yunaru Am, or it could be Chas v'Shalom, right? And so Razili, Tzvi L'Tzadik, says the Rebbe, B'chinas Kedushas HaZivug. This is the aspect of the Kedushas HaZivug, of the Shakai, of the Shmir Sabris, of which there are two varieties, like we said, there are two levels. And why is that Tzvi L'Tzadik? Because that's precisely what a Tzadik is. The Tzadik, like we learned from the Zohar Kodesh, is man, the Natar Brisai, right? That's what a Tzadik is. And so Tzvi L'Tzadik, that's a reference to Shmir Sabris. Razili, says the Rebbe, these are the two aspects of Shmir Sabris. Yesh Shnei Razin. There are two aspects of Raz. Haini Yichudei Ilah, Yichudei Tata, both of which are mysterious. Because even the rational level, so to speak, of Yiddishkeit, which is total ridiculous. Now, there's no rationality in Yiddishkeit, right? But let's say, according to those rationalist Jews, that there's no mystery, there's no mysticism, still, even the fact that that rational Yiddishkeit accounts for there being a divine being, which most of the world, let's say, or at least in the Western culture, doesn't believe in that, even that is a mystery, right? Meaning it's still mystical in the sense that it requires a connection to that which cannot be sensed and cannot be touched or cannot be fully grasped. And maybe that is rational, right? But fundamentally, like we said, you dive off, you jump off of the diving board of MS, ultimately into some realm of emunah. That's still a raz. And that's still a secret. That's still connecting you to a mystical beyond and to a source for this world that we experience. So there are shnei razin. Hayni yichudi la v'yichudi tata. Shei mechinas halacha v'kabbalah v'mechinas razin v'razin derazin. And so that's what the pasuk is telling us. La asid lavai v'la yikanef oid merecha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will not be. I'm sorry, it's not the end of that pasuk. I'm sorry. Miknaf ha'aretz, rather. Zmira shemanu. From the edges of the earth, we heard song. And we said knaf is matat because like a kanaf, like a wing, it is garbing, right, the body kiviyachol of the Ein Sof. And from that place, tzvilat tzaddik. That in order for me to be able to transcend that aspect, that I shouldn't be stuck within under the reality, so to speak, of matat and that illusion, right? But that I should be a Shabbos Yid, so I need to be able tzvilat tzaddik shmir sabris razili to journey from the aspect of halacha, hiril Hashem kal aretz, the bechina of the zivug of the chol with all of its associated meaning, like we learned in its significance from an experiential standpoint, to rise above to the razin of Kabbalah of hishtachvul Hashem. Bahadras Kodesh, and to rise up to the Zivug of Shabbos. This is what Chazal say. The Gemara in Chulin says, let the glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu be forever. Sar ha'olam amare. This is said by the Malach Matat. And it gives us interesting little story of when the Malach Matat made this announcement to be Hichvoid Hashem La'olam. B'shashar Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu Li'ilanos Liminehu. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu told the Ilanos, told the trees, you must grow Liminehu. You must grow, each one in accordance with its own species. And this was told to the trees. Nasu D'Shaim Kal V'chomer Ba'atzman. The lowlier grasses and the lowlier plants of the garden made a kal v'chomer for themselves. And they said, Ma ilana shem gavoyim ve'einam tchufim. If it's true for the trees that are incredibly tall and incredibly strong and distinct, ve'einam tchufim, and they're not all bent over one and the other, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu liminehu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them, each one is only supposed to be its own species and not to intermingle with the others. So much more so do we need to be careful because that we're planted right next to each other, and very easily we could blur the distinction between species and species. We need to come out each one on its own. And in that moment, Pasach Sara Olam, this Malach Matat opened his mouth, Amar Yichvoid Hashem La'olam. Let the glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu be forever. What a strange Gemara. Right? What is it? So obviously there has to be something deeper here. And says the Heilige Rebbe, because he learns it so beautifully based on everything that we learned. This sefer is a bechina of Allah Yukanivoid Merecha. This sefer itself is lifting away the garments. You see the Geulah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's emes through the Torah in this sefer. It's a glimmer of Las Lava, this experience. So the Rebbe says this. He says, Ki be'emes Him gedolim. Ki be'emes gam ha-gedolim. Shezivugam einen tchufim rak mishavas l'shabes gam lahemes hirat Torah shmir sabris. He says those ilanos, those trees, in this context, are a reference to the tzaddikim, whose zivug is the bechina of Kabbalah mishabes l'shabes. And that means that they're all standing up, each one distinctly in and of themselves, far removed from any chash of adultery and any chash of mixing with a species that isn't theirs, liminehu, right? That they shouldn't be mixing. But them also, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them, you better be careful. And these are the ilanos, the tzaddikim liminehu. They also have to be warned on Shmir Sabrishi, Yishmeras Atzman, because it's not easy for anyone. And no matter what level as an ideal a person is striving to, every person needs to be guarded. And the Rebbe says, I'll prove it to you that about Shabbos, you also need to be guarded. Kamaisha Kasav is Shamru, B'nei Yisrael Es HaShabbos is Rosh Tevis Bia. Right, is Rosh Tevis for this word of intimacy. Kamuva B'Kavanas. Hainu Afal Pisha Zivuga Hu Rak MiShabbos LeShabbos, Afal Pikein Tzarech Shmira Geulah. Even though their zivug is only from Shabbos to Shabbos, and so theoretically, l'chayra, on a surface level, they're much more removed from this inyan of the inyan of bris. Still, says the Rebbe, they need al pi kein tzarech shmir gedayla. Bechinas v'shamru b'nei Yisrael es HaShabbos. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael es HaShabbos is bia, and that's the bechina of the yichud of Shabbos, but v'shamru. They also need shmir sabris, right? And even those tzaddikim on that level. So he says, Kol sheken aktanim. So all the more so for the katanim, shein bechinas deshaim, that in this Gemara in Chulin are the lower grasses, shezivugam tchufim, that their zivug it's under duress, right, from the standpoint of not being completely free from a physical gratification level. Gam mesheishes me'achol, and then their zivug is during the 6 days of the week. Mikol shekin shetzichem shmir gedayla lishmer brisam. So all the more so, right, because they're much more connected to it. You know from the Gemara, Ever katan v'chule rayu savea rayu, right. So the more that a person is engaged in this behavior, so the more that a person is connected to this physical experience. And certainly they need a bechina of shmir saber sheyishmers atzman al piatar bebechinas limineihem. And this was the Kal V'chomer, that when the smaller fries, when these little grasses saw the big trees, and they said that they have to be shomer their bris, all the more so us, right, that we're tchufin and mixed in with all the others. Certainly, we require to be very, very careful in Shmir Sabris. They made a Kal V'chomer. Miyad, kishashama sar ha'olam shu matat. When this malach matat, this matatron, when he heard this, that his whole shlita is in the 6 days of the week, the bechina of the deshaim, of these vegetables, the lower vegetation. So bechinas yichud tata, and when he saw that gevalt, even those that are just in the bechina of the 6 days of the week, the bechina of yichud tata, the 6 days of the week that are under the shlita of the malach matat, and they too are guarding themselves to reveal HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, not just in the Yechudi Ilah world of the next realm, but dafka here in Olam Hazeh, al pi halacha, Hariul Hashem kala aretz, pasach va'amar yihi chvayid Hashem lo'elam. See, and it's dafka the malach matat, because only with the Rebbe's understanding can you read this Gemara properly. Only once you know, right, that there's 2 times shakai and shmir sabrisi la and tata yichudi la yichudi tata. Shabbos is without l'ay kanef ein merecha, without the knafa aretz mir shemanu. This 6 days of the week is under the shlita of matat. So then all of a sudden you're able to then see the presence of the malach matat in this context with absolute clarity. And matat is responding to the Kal V'chomer of the deshaim, who are a reference to the tzaddikim whose zivug is b'sheish yemei hachol. Because that is the Yehi Chvoid Hashem La'olam. That is how the glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu fills the world. The Bechina of Baruch Shem Kivoid Malchusai, which, like we learned at the very beginning, is the Yichud Tata, as opposed to the Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is the Yichud Ilah. So therefore, says the Rebbe, Kvoid Daika. And this is the Kvoid. Why kvoid? Because if you didn't have Shmir Sabris, then you don't have the Vav, which is the Bechin of Yosef, like we learned, and what instead you have? Kavad. But now that the Deshayim are connecting themselves to the Shmir Sabris of Tzvi L'Tzadik, Razili, and they're learning in a Kal V'chomer from the Ilanais that are the Bechina of the Zivug of Shabbos Kodesh, of Kabbalah, and they're in the aspect of Halacha, living in the Yichud Tata, they recognize we have to work on this, we have to be people that are aligning with Halacha, and as he says, Al Pi Halacha, right, to be guarding ourselves, Al Pi Halacha, in this reality. So then the Vav is brought into the Kvad, and we have Kavod. And when we swap out the Kvad, which is Kvad Peh, and we bring a Vav into that letter, into those 3 letters, Kavod, then we have Kavod V'lo Yidaim. Then we have a tikkun for the Gaiva, right, which is the Bechin of not being able to talk, like we learned yesterday, the aspect of Sagru Pimoy Dibru Begeyas, and then a person's mouth is able to be me'ir with the diburei HaTorah, with the kavod focused on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to Chas v'Shalom, we can avoid la yamush sefer HaTorah zemipicha, which is by yamish choshech, where it becomes darkened in our mouths, and instead the diburei Torah are able to be me'ir, the bechina of chaim heim l'moitze'ehem bepeh. Kvoid daika. Because through these two aspects of Shmir Sabris, different strata of Klal Yisrael, the simple folk and the Tzadikei Elyon, each one with their Avodah, but both of them with their Shmira, that's what we need. We can't have everybody on the level of Yichud Ilah, can't have everybody in the Yichud Tata. It's always a balance, and every person needs to know for themselves and in their relationship and at that stage in life and so on, where they're up to, in this progressive journey of deepening and deepening and deepening our Kedusha in this area of bris. But ultimately, when you have them both, then you have the ultimate, right? So the Rebbe says, when we have in Klal Yisrael these two levels, you have the trees, the big mighty trees, and you have the small lowly vegetation of the Desha'im, which is the Yichud Tata, G'dolim Uktanim, Zivik Shal Shabbos, Zivik Shal Chol, V'chinas Halacha and Kabbalah, Razin and Razin de Razin, Azaya covered b'shleimus. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence is absolutely, completely, fully revealed in the world, both in potential and in actuality, which we learned in a previous lesson is correlating to Tefillah and Torah on every level. The Igulim and the Yosher, the Mem and the Samuch Shabaluchas, everything else that we had learned is all this. This is the shleimus of the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this reality. And then a person can be privileged to words that are illuminating, words that are shining, words that are lichtig, words that are bringing chiyas to people, words that are inspiring. And through that a person can access the deepest layers of Torah, because now he has halacha and Kabbalah, razin to razin, and this is going to open all the gates for a person. And this is what Rabbi Bar Chana says, and we continue with these stories from the Gemara in Baba Basra. And he says like this: one time we were on a boat, and we saw this bird, a gigantic bird. It was up to its ankles in the water, and it was standing lofty, like a gigantic bird, and in his ankles he was in the water. And his head of the bird was in the sky. A gigantic big bird, from Sesame Street. Is that a thing here in Britain? Yeah, big bird. Okay, huge, with its head all the way up in the sky, and his feet are on the ground. I just ruined Torah Aleph for everybody forever and ever. Sorry, you won't be able to see any other bird now. Anyway, v'amrin less maya. So we in the boat thought, okay, the water is very shallow here. Like a maya, look at the Rashbam, right? That the water must not be very deep. Because we looked and it's up to its ankles, so maybe the water is very, very, very shallow. We thought we'd stop there and we'd refresh ourselves, in these waters. We'd go out the boat and have a little swim, because it's not dangerous, it's shallow. The fig braskala. A baskal came out of Amalon and it told us, do not descend here. The baskal said, I want to let you know that there was some workerman, a nagar, a craftsman who was traveling in this area, and he dropped a hammer 7 years ago. It hasn't reached the ground yet. 7 years it's sinking. And then he says, and the Baskal said, not because the water is that deep, because the water it's like a whirlpool. What's it called? A tempest. It's another word for that. It's what? Yeah, rapid, something like that. There's another word, but right, that the redifa maya, that the water, right? So let's look in the Rashbam. Chatzina is a garzon ematzad. It's some kind of a hammer or some kind of tool. Levad nagra charish eitzim. In this case, it was a wood chopper. It's not because the water is 7 years deep, so to speak, and that's how long it'll take. That's not why the hammer hasn't reached the ground yet, the seabed. Like the rapids, they're very, very sharp, and they haven't calmed. And it's not because of the depth, but it's very dangerous to go here. Amar Rav Ashi says, Hi Ziz Sadaihu. This was Big Bird. Okay. Hi Ziz Sadaihu. He says, this bird, actually it's right here, Mavur, in the text that it wasn't Big Bird, unless, I don't know, he has an Aramaic name. This bird was called the Ziz Sadai. Dichsiv, because the pasuk says, V'ziz Sadai imadi. And the bird of the field, which is called the Ziz of the Sada, was with me. And it's such a gigantic bird that its head is reaching the heavens. Okay, this is Adkan, this incredible little paragraph and this little anecdote from Rabbi Chana that's incredibly deep. Says the Rebbe, let's deconstruct it, the last few minutes we have. Tziparta zabachinas hadibor. Tzipor is speech. Shuem tzai ben ha'adam shenes ava mimayin duchrin v'nukvin ben ha'shamayim shebachinas tvunas ha'tayra. And this bird, which is Dibor, is standing in the water between earth and heaven. What's the water? The water is that the human being is created from a conjugation and an interpolation of what's called male waters and female waters, right? Which is the zera of the ish and the zera also of the isha that are coming together to combine to form the human being. That's called mayin nukvin and mayin duchrin. More broadly, this is also code word in Kabbalah for what we would call in the more sefer nigla, but still, machshava, Isirusa de Lasata and Isirusa de La'ela. Isirusa de Lasata, an awakening from below, in Kabbalah's form is called Mayin Nukvin. Right? That is called the Mayin Nukvin, the feminine waters, right? That are awakening the male, arousing the male, and then that is bringing down Mayin Duchrin, the male waters, right? And that's what's taking place within our own physiology, obviously on a much more individuated basis, but ultimately, cosmically, this is the Mayin Nukvin and Mayin Duchrin, that every human being is created out of these two energies, right? And the X and the Y chromosome, if you want to go on that level, the level of Chesed and Gevura, left and right, all of these different aspects are coming down to form this wondrous being, which is the human being. And so that's the symbol of water. And the Tzipar is Dibur, and our speech is the intermediate between us on earth, right, which is the waters on earth, and being able to reach into heavens, which is Tunas HaTayr La'amka. And so that's this bird, which is Dibur, as we're going to learn in a minute, as we've seen in Torah Gimel, has to do with speech, as we're going to learn. And it's standing in water, because it's the human being who's created out of the Mayin Nukvin and Mayin Duchrin. And it's between earth and heaven because it's the speech, like we learned, Chaim Heim L'Moitze'em B'Peh, that's going to enable us to access Tvunas HaTayr La'amka. Ka'amuva al Mitzayra. What does it have to do with speech? Because of the Mitzayra, Shetzarach Lavish Nei Tziparim, that he has to bring two birds, like we learned in Torah Gimel. You have a Petatia, it's a different word. Over there it was Klanya. You have a Petatia, V'yichaper al Petatia. It's just the same word. Let the chirper come, which is the bird, and he should rectify the one who chirped, right? Because Dibor is the Bechina of speech. And Vizeo Dekoy ad Kursele B'maya. He was standing up to his ankle in water. Why up to his ankle? Because Dibur needs to be able to illuminate to all the places that a person needs to do tshuva. Sometimes it's an aspect of the pasuk in Rus, that she revealed his feet and laid down. That the words need to come down to a person's feet. The words need to be to the ankles in water, right? Meaning that aspect of being between Shemaim and Arts, which is the Tzipor, the Dibor, right? That's mediating between us and our reality and that reality beyond. Sometimes it should be up to our ankles, meaning it should go down to that place in our life, which is Torah that's speaking to the dregs, Torah that's speaking to the low level of the human experience. That's this bird, which is Dibor, which is the rectification of the Mitzayra, whose whole Pagam, of course, was Lashon Hara, was Dibor, and it's standing in this Maya ad Kursale. ad kursule. And Maya, like we said, hu bechinas Adam. This is the aspect of the human being, shenes haba mimayin duchrin u'mayin nukvin, who is created, like we mentioned, on a physiological level and on a spiritual, metaphysical level of the feminine and the masculine waters. Do as is known, v'hadibur shebechinas siparta koya ad kursule b'maya. Right? And it is reaching that person's ankles. And the dibur is illuminating for that person. It's revealing, it's enabling those lower levels to have access to the revelation of Hashem's light. And that's that reference. But we said, less maya. There's no water. What does this mean? We understood the only way is if we're able to access K'vod Shemayim b'shleimus, that's why we're learning. And that's why we're connecting to tzaddikim, because we know that our kursule is b'maya, and we need the chizuk, and but it's with K'vod Hashem, and we're just coming humbly to learn and to access the inspiration that the tzaddikim are revealing to us through Tunas Hatar La'amka, which is the sefer that we're learning now. It needs to be K'vod b'shleimus, which means she'yah adam be'einav efes va'ayin. The person needs to be totally nullified. So va'amrinan, they said, in order for us to access and to gain from the amira of the tziparta of this bird, less maya. We need to be mavatal the human, because maya is the human. Mayin nukvin, mayin duchrin. Less maya. We need to get the human being out of the way. She'yah adam be'einav efes va'ayin. There's a less maya. Sha'adam yachzik atzma la'ayin, that a person should hold himself as nothing and enter into the to the tzaddik's room humbly. Ach shahaya la'akuri nafshin, but la'akuri nafshin lashon oiker enesh mipaz, that a person who holds themselves to be more precious than gold. Hain shaya nava b'shvil gadlos. They tried to make like a scam. They tried to pretend humble so that they would be able to access what we're learning about. So the humility was a ploy in order, but it was really for them. Because they've learned and they know how embarrassing and how shameful godless is. So in order to have the kavod of being the opposite of a Baal Gaiva, so then they pretended to be Al Yidei Ha'anava. Says the Rebbe, there's no greater Gaiva than that. Right? And that's a tricky one, because that's not so clear. That requires a person to really clarify their motivations. And this is the Rebbe wants to push us into authenticity ad asof. He's not sufficing just on a surface. Ad asof. So it has to be tachlis ha'anivos, and not anivos b'shvil gaiva, which is tachlis ha'gaiva. V'zeu b'i'inan l'nichusa. So we wanted to descend, which means to be shval v'anavim, but lo'ikera nafshin kidei shal yedei zeh niu yikarim chashuvim ki ha'gaiva mevuzah ma'od. Meaning that our whole Indian of b'i'inan l'nichusa, of wanting to descend and to make ourselves humbler, was only lo'ikera nafshin. Was for the purpose of Gaiva. And why did we want that? Why did we want in the first place to descend from the boat? Because less maya. Because they understood that in order to access this tzipora, and in order for the words to come down into their ankles, right, which is standing ad kursule b'maya, we understood less maya. We need to get the human out of the way. So we went down from the boat, but it was like kira nafshin. But it was an anivas l'shem Gaiva. The fak braskol of Amar, so out comes the baskol, and it says, Loid chusu hacha. No, this is not the way. Loid chusu liyishvalim b'shvil zeh. Don't enter into an experience of shiflus for this, b'shvil a kairi nafshin, that it should be for the purpose of magnifying your covet just in a secret way. She's here, my baskol, that the baskol is warning them, shaloyu anavim b'shvil lihisyakru liskabed. Let them not do this. Let them not pretend to be humble, b'shvil lihisyakru liskabed, in order really to be more arrogant and for their own personal glory. Because anivas itachlis hagadlus. This is not anivas. This is just false anivas. This is just being a tzavua, right? Just on the outside, but it's not on the inside. Because he said, I want you to know that this hammer of this craftsman, of this wood chopper, fell 7 years ago, and it hasn't yet reached the ground. That the Baskal is telling them, you want to know the root of Gaiva, so that a person should be distanced until the end, and not to descend, like we said, in this way. A person needs to be shval ruach ma'oid ma'oid. And he means to tell them, what do you mean? You're going to be an ana b'shval gaiva, but don't you know that the gaiva is God's? That any sense of self is really God's sense of self manifesting. It's the Shechina Kedosha. That's the real ani. Shehu levushai. It comes from Hashem, which is levush. Kamay shekasav Hashem malach geyes lavesh. How could a person then rise into an experience of gaiva when the truth is that, and this is the secret, that they themselves are part of the matat and part of that maracha through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is revealing himself. Right? There's no shtei reshuyas, right? Because there's no greater shtei reshuyas than a person believing that they exist as an independent entity. No greater shtei reshuyas. And to be mevatal our ratzon for the purpose of the Ritzoyna Elyon, which is Shmiras Halacha, that's how we're matakin matat. And we revealed away that actually I don't exist, and really the lo yakanaf oid marecha, and that's how a person gets to live in Geulah consciousness, even here in Galus, because from their standpoint there is no matat, because they're batal, understand? And this is the whole purpose of halacha. But really it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's geyos. Hashem malach, so geyos lavish, but he put his geyos into a levush. We'll just go a little bit further. V'zeu denafle denefala chatzina. A hammer fell. Says the Rebbe, this chatzina is an aspect of a levush. Bechinas levush kamoisha kasav v'chitznei ma'amer. And those who put sheaths in their garments. So you see that this 3 letters, ches tzadi nun, could actually be a reference to a garment. So the nefala chatzina, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, the Baskal, it says to these people, you want to be anavim, in order that that you should be about gaiva. Don't you know that the nafla chatzina, that this gaiva is really just HaKadosh Baruch Hu's garment that has fallen? The nafla chatzina, the chitzna ma'amar, bar nagra. It's God's. Zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem is the craftsman. HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's instituting mayim in the heavens. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a craftsman, the Gemara in Chulin says. Menefilas halavush hazeh, which is matat, nes'ava agadlus. This is where Gaiva comes from. Shubachina Sheva Batei Akum, which is the aspect of the 7 Batei Akum, the 7 kinds of Avodah Zarah of the Oivdei Kachal Mazalis. Shal Yedei Geulah Yisrael Me Artzam. That this is why we went into exile. Kamamar Chachamim Tzchad Davacha Like Geulah Yisrael At Sha'avdu Ba Sheva Batei Akum. The Gemara in Gittin tells us Klal Yisrael went into exile because we served the 7 Batei Akum. Ubishvil Zanikra Akum Eloshin Tiferes, and that's why the Goyim, specifically Avodas Alilim, is called Tiferes Kamashik. Kisiferes Adam Lasheves Bayis. Like Ki'ilu, they take Tiferes for themselves. Because we learned already in Torah Yud, Ki Avodah Zarah is Gaiva, right? And Gaiva is Avodah Zarah. Humenefilis is Parusai. Is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Tiferes. And that's why Avodah Zarah is referenced here in the Pasuk Yeshayahu as Tiferes. And how many years did the hammer, which is the HaKadosh Baruch Hu's levush, the Chitznoi Ma'amer, how many years did it not fall? 7. Because it's connected these 7 Batei Akum, because Akum is Gaiva. Right? And Avodah Zarah is Gaiva. And this is falling for 7 years. Hashvashnin, Zebachinas Hagadlu, Shbechinas Sheva Batei Akum, V'zeu, V'loi Mata La'ara. Hanishal Yedea Avan Hazeh, so heartbreaking, I'm telling you. Loi Chazarna La'artseinu, that's what it means, Loi Mata La'ara. Not that the hammer didn't hit the seabed. We haven't yet reached our land yet. We haven't yet gone home. Ki al yedei ha'avan hazeh, it's through this blemish of gaiva, shu gadlus, shu ka'ovid avodah zara b'china sheva batei akum, which caused the gullus in the first place. Al yedei zeh galina me'artzeinu. That's why we went into gullus. Al yedei zeh adayin ulei chazarnu la'artzeinu. And this is why we haven't yet completely returned to our land. Hakol al yedei ha'avan hazeh shel gadlus. It's all because of gaiva. It's all because of gullus mentality. It's all because of this experience of a person who's an independent entity, instead of completely nullifying ourselves to the mission, nullifying ourselves to the neshama, nullifying ourselves to who we really are and what this world really is and what Am Yisrael are really supposed to do in this world. That the reason we didn't get back into Eretz Yisrael, meaning this, that the chitzna, right, that hammer didn't yet reach the ground, which means that we didn't yet come back to Eretz Yisrael is because the water's so deep. Mishum denefisha maya, meaning machmasha akam heim rabim, because the goyim are just preventing us. But bechinas rabim hagoyim ha'ela, that the rabim, that the mayim rabim denefisha maya, right, which is harasham kayam nigrash, that the rasham are like this stormy tempest. Shei mechinas mayim rabim. No, that's not why. Elamishum deradifa mayim. It's only because Shem writes from Acher Kavod, Redifa Maya. That's why we didn't go back to Eretz Yisrael. Don't hinge on anything else. There's no anti-Semitism. There's nothing else. It's because of this that Klal Yisrael are not yet in a Geulah-oriented space of anivos and of all the Geulah consciousness that we've been learning that Rebbe Nachman is trying to reveal to Klal Yisrael before the end of time. We should listen to him to bring us into Moichin the Gadlus, the Moichin the Eretz Yisrael. That's why we haven't gotten back to our land. It's because of the kavod. It's because of this that we cannot get back to Eretz Yisrael. Because instead of less maya, instead of putting ourselves aside and trying really to transcend and really to manifest HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world and not getting caught up with this worldly institutional, whatever it is that we built for ourselves, and this organization and that organization, this logo and that shtus on top of shtus, and this community and that, all this stuff, but to transcend it, to be neshamas that are looking at Klal Yisrael as neshamas, that are looking not just in Klal Yisrael and our own internal success, but to look at all of humanity and to care and to cry and to feel and to be broad and nuanced and deep and visionary. This is what Klal Yisrael need, and if we could do this, and if every member of Klal Yisrael was in this consciousness, says the Rebbe, we would get back to Eretz Yisrael. We would do it. We would do it, but it's on us. It's not on anyone else. Because we're still trying to magnify this silly illusion of our own success. There's such a thing called success, when really all that there is a Kodesh Baruch Hu's attempt to reveal himself, both in the Ratzai and in the Shaiv, through our Shtadlus and through our failures and everything. But it's not us. Hurak machmas ki ikar. Listen to these words. Ki ikar arichas hagolus she'in yechadun lashav la'artzeinu. This, that the golus is so long, as well as the shir and chanami, but hopefully that's Geulah length, not Golus length. Ki ikar arich. I apologize. Just want to make it to the end so we can start a new Torah tomorrow. The ikar arichas hagolus she'in yechadun lashav la'artzeinu. The primary reason for the extension of exile, that we have not been privileged enough to return to our land. Who rak machmas avayna gadlus erdif esakavit kanisklel. That's it. Period. End of story. The Rebbe says, don't hinge it on anything else. It is this. Because this sits at the core of all of the other averis and all of the other problems that we have as a community and as a world. Because this sits at the essence of what it means to be a Jew. Is to get ourselves out of the way and to allow HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light to reveal itself within us. And the Rebbe is training us how to do that. How to be able to take that brain of exile out and to replace it with a consciousness of Geulah, lesson by lesson, word by word. This is what the Baskal is telling them. How ashamed, what's the word? How degraded this arrogance is, to stay super far away from it. Ma'oid. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu's covered is going to be b'shleimus. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem Malach Geus Lavish, the covered is the lavush. That's matat. Then it will be b'shleimus because it will be communicating Hashem's presence instead of hiding Hashem's presence. Which is the tikkun of bringing Shabbos into the Sheishis Miachal to reveal the Yichud Tata, which is the purpose of halacha and the purpose of everything. And then we'll be zeicha to words that are shining. How do you do this? That a person should come to total bittul of their own aspect of arrogance. It's just Shmir Sabris, Shemechinas Yichudi Ilah, the Yichud Tata. This is the aspect of the Yichudi Ilah and the Yichud Tata, the lower unity, Sheishis Me'achal, and the Yichudi Ilah of the higher unity of Shabbos Kodesh. And that with this he finishes, V'zesh Amar Rab Ashi, Hai Ziv Ziz Sadaihu. It's a mistake. It's say Sadai. It's a mistake. It's Ziz Shadai, but he's trying to make a reference here to Shakai, right, where it is a shin and not a sin. Says the Rebbe, this is the Bechin of Yichudi Ilah, Yichud Tata. Which is Shmir Sabris on the two aspects. If you want to get to this level, Ziz Shakai Hu. Ziz Shakai. What's the connection? And then through this, Shmir Sabris leads to Kavod B'Shleimus, leads to Diburim HaMeirim. Shua Dibur, Shua Emsai, Be'mayler Akia. Ki Ziz, Hu Bechinas Yichud Tata, Bechinas Matat, this is the aspect of the Yichud Tata, which is Matat, which is the wing of the earth, which is Hashem Malach Geus Lavesh. Ki Yisa B'Medrash Rabbah, Oif Echad Yesh. Because it says in the Medrash, there's a bird, B'Shashem Mafresh Es Knafav, that when it spreads its wings, Hu Machshich Es HaShemesh, it hides the sun, the Ziz Shmai, and its name is Ziz. And if you take a look in the Sharichad Ve'emun of the Balatanya, over there where I told you to look for the Yichud Ilah and Yichud Tata, he puts it into a pasuk, Ki Shemesh U'Magen Hashem Elikim. Elikim is the Yichud Tata, Yud Kevav is the Yichud Ilah, and that Shemesh U'Magen. So over here we're learning about the Magen for the Shemesh, that which blocks the overt light of the sun and filters it, which is this aspect of the Malach Matat. Shemafresh has Knafav, which is Miknafa Arid Zmir Shemanu, which is V'leikanif Oid Mayrecha, and Hu Machshich as Hashemesh, V'ziz Shemai. And this bird is called Ziz. V'zeh b'chinas Yichud Tata, b'chinas Matat, b'chinas Miknafa Arid Sheboy, Mislabish Brisila. That the elevated covenant, the elevated expression of God's connection to reality is mislabish within it, shubachinas Hashemesh, which is our lived experience of individuality, which is Hashem's malach geus labish, but it comes through us. But we have to utilize that, like we said in Torah above, to be memayit b'chvod atzmai, and thereby marbe b'chvod amakayim, and shakai, zebachinas yichud ilah. This is the aspect, ziz, shakai, who this is ziz, is yichud tata. Right, this bird that's hiding the light of the sun, which is the Malach Matat, and Sadai, or Shakai, is the aspect of Shakai, Yichudi La. V'zeu Ani Hashem. This is the pasuk, Ani Hashem is Yichudi La, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Hu Shemi, which is always a reference to Elikim, Yichud Tata, Ki Shemesh U'Magen, Hashem Elikim. When a person has covered b'shleimus, when there isn't a bechin of shtei reshuyos, when we start to look at the world as an independent entity and ourselves within it experiencing the world as an independent entity, then the covered is b'shleimus, then utihilasi lapsilim. Zebechinas hadibor. Then the dibor is not to psilim. Then the dibor is complete. How do we know that tehillah is a reference to speech? Because we're about to say, Kamashya Kosef, tehillas Hashem, yidaber pi, hakol kanizkir el. Chevra, if I was to write a book just on this one teaching, maybe I will one day. Do you know how much there is here in this one page? Do you know you can squeeze this page for all of eternity and you will never, ever, ever reach the sof? Do you know that you can look in all the Perushim, and this is a bechin of Tzvilat Tzadik Rozali Rozali, you have to praise Tzadikim. He praised himself, you have to praise them. Look, I'm challenging you, go look in the Mefarshim on this Maimer of Rabbi Bar Chana and compare. And it's all beautiful, the Ben Ish Chai has, the Geulah has, everybody has. Compare it to this. Remember what we said, the Rebbe said that he's saying these Torahs over, B'Shem Amran, in the name of Rabbi Bar Chana, who revealed himself to the Rebbe and told him the true interpretation. This is not Yesh Loimar and Lani Azdaiti. This is it. This is it. We're learning from a person who knew the true Messiah of the transmission of Torah. And he is hidden, like Yosef HaTzadik was thrown into a bar, and the whole Klal Yisrael ridicules him, and everybody makes fun, and everybody doesn't know what they're dare to open their mouth to talk about. They don't know Hashem Yichaper B'Adam. And we have to do our job to reveal this to Klal Yisrael. We're not turning people into Breslovers, Zelo and Yan. That we're talking about the Nakuda, that people have to access this Torah. And it's so difficult. It's so difficult because the obstacles are so vast. But to those of us who are beginning to taste it, this is not optional. We need to find a way to do our role, to bring this to people. Hashem should bless us to do this, so that Klal Yisrael could wake up. Rebbe Nachman said the world tells stories to put people to sleep, and I tell stories to wake people up. He wanted to wake people up, that we can do our job as Klal Yisrael within the context of the Umas HaOlam to bring the world back to Hashem. Hashem should bless us to do this. B'simcha v'leiv shalim.
שכל כך אוהב אותי האב שלי מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני